Hello class and welcome to our last lecture, I think, on the job search documents. I wanted to give you guys an overview of the remaining documents that are going to be in your packet for this project, but are also necessary, well, highly advised, I guess would be the word, before you start any job search of your own or start applying for internships. So these additional materials have to do with a lot of different things. So I'm gonna try to go through this quick and make this a shorter lecture than I usually do. As usual, if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you want to join me in our meeting room during office hours to ask me any questions, I'm also happy to talk to you then, or we can arrange a different meeting for either in person or online. I just want to reiterate that because I feel like I want to make sure that you guys get as much information from me as you can. So anyways, to move through this a little bit quicker than I already am, let's go ahead and get into this. So before we get into this other stuff, I want to talk about social media. Now you've all heard all this stuff about how employers are now using social media to kind of screen candidates. There's no real legal reason why they can't do this. Equal opportunity employers can't judge against race, gender, sexuality in some places, and a couple other factors, but they can look at your Facebook profile if it's public or your Instagram posts if they're public and kind of form an impression of you as a potential employer or employee. So you want to be careful about this before you really get into applying for any positions. Now, this is a tricky little thing because if you, as I've seen with some of my colleagues when they're applying for academic jobs, if you delete Facebook profiles and delete your, I guess Snapchat doesn't matter, but if you delete your Twitter profile and all that stuff, then it's going to send up red flags because if you're applying for things and you have no web presence, then it's going to look like something's going on, like either you're hiding something or, not that you're made out, but that it's a little bit fishy. So you want to kind of strike this balance. And so what I would recommend if you're thinking about social media and the job search is to clean up your feeds or your wall or your timeline or whatever. If that means deleting that drunken Twitter or the drunken tweet that you sent out the other day because you really thought something was funny, but it turned out it was inappropriate, then delete that tweet. It's still out there in the ether, but it means that your potential employer has to dig a little bit deeper to get to it. Take those pictures off of you doing a bong rip or of you whatever. I mean, think about the way you're portraying yourself as a potential employee. You can, while you're doing this, one way to do it is to increase your security settings on a lot of these websites just to make it so that only friends can see it or things like that. It's hard to do with Twitter. I'm not very familiar with Instagram, so I'm not sure about that, but I know with Facebook, and then you can really set the security settings up high so that people can see that you have a Facebook profile, but they cannot see everything that you've done in the past year or whatever. All right. While you're also doing that, you do want a web presence, especially if you're looking at a very specific professional field. If you're just trying to get a job, then this isn't as big of a deal. But if you're trying to get a job in veterinary sciences or in accounting or in a very specific field, then one thing that you can do is to get on listservs. And I know this is an old term and nobody thinks about it, but the listservs, for email and that sort of stuff, they are useful if only because they give you information as it's going to your potential employer. So you'll hear about a news event that they're hearing about, or you'll hear about something that's a change in whatever policy or whatever. So listservs are a good idea. Keeping in touch with blogs. I mean, it's not really a social presence, but keeping in touch with blogs that are key in your field so that you know information going into interviews to help you out. And I know everybody laughs about LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile, and I think I've been on it once a year in the last 5 years. But I have it, and it's useful to have because it's specifically for networking and professional networking. That's the idea behind LinkedIn. And while it's not going to help you out too much, it's a useful thing to have just in case. Okay. So, this is just a map that is put together every year of what the social networking things are out there, and just keep an eye on this sort of stuff. We all know a lot of these things. I mean, I don't think Google Plus is still anything, but you can see the social networks, but also the professional networks, LinkedIn, okay, as well as these others that are more specific. Okay, just something to keep in mind. So the documents, the rest of the documents that we're talking about. So we have 3 more documents that I want you to put together for the job search packet. But these are also useful things to have in your back pocket just in case. So you have your reference request letters, which is a formal way to ask something that a lot of your references will already know. Like if it's your last employer, they're going to figure that you're going to be asking them for a reference when you're applying for jobs. If it's your major advisor, then they probably, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't be expecting you to ask them to serve as a reference for when you go on the job market. So you want to have this stuff. Your referees will know that you are going to be asking them for a reference, but you want to be formal about it, because this is basically you're asking them to put their credibility behind you. All right. And while that shouldn't be a big deal, it can be a big ask. So just make sure about this. Another way to think about this is if you put someone down as a reference and they get called out of the blue and they're not expecting it, then they're not going to be able to do a good job of referring you. So you want to make sure that they have a record that you asked them for this. And one way to make sure of that is to formally ask, in an email or in a formal letter. Okay. So the reference request letter, who are you going to ask to be your references? You're going to ask former and current employers. Okay. Paid or volunteer work, it doesn't matter. Okay. I know that when I was applying for positions when I was in college, I used my high school volunteer coordinator, which was a long while ago, but still, I mean, she could speak to the type of information that was important for a professional reference, even though I wasn't getting paid. I was still showing up on time, doing whatever duties were assigned me as a volunteer, and blah, 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 blah. All right. You can ask faculty members. Why? Because this, in a lot of senses, is a job. If you are a full-time student or a part-time student, either way, you're a student who is working professionally as a student to accomplish something. Okay. So you're doing what's asked of you. You're turning things in on time. It's like a freelance type of job in which you don't have a direct report manager, but you do have people that you're reporting to and clients that you're serving, clients, quote unquote, that you're serving in your teachers. Okay, so a faculty member can serve as a referee. Now, one thing to note is that I'm saying faculty member. You don't want a TA or a GA. As much as I would love to write a letter of recommendation, because I'm a student, there's a certain cachet that comes with that doctor title, like at a University of Kentucky, or that MFA, that terminal degree. You want someone that's a faculty member that's solid here. Why? Because they can speak to you in reference to a whole host of other students that they've had. And whether or not it's fair, that's the way it is. You also want to ask a faculty member because you know that they are going to be there for a little while. Graduate students, I know, I mean, I've been in Lexington for, a decade, but, well, less than that. But graduate students tend to be more transient and move around a little bit more. So the faculty member is going to be there for a little while. And so it's a good idea to have, when you ask these referees, these people that are going to give you a reference, you want to make sure that you can keep in contact with them. Because if they're a good reference now, then they might be a good reference the next time you go on the job market. Unless that's like 6 years or 5 or 6 years from now. You also can ask advisors, supervisors, mentors, and coaches, and this is specifically important if you're looking at education, social, or work-related fields, because a lot of your faculty members and your employers are not going to know how you interact with these specialty populations. Children, if you're talking about or primary education, or disabled people or whatever. A lot of times supervisors and mentors will have that information and can help you in that way, in a way that a faculty member cannot. All right, so one thing to think about is a professional reference can speak to your professionalism, as should be obvious, but professionalism meaning like ability to show up on time, ability to do what you're asked, and all this sort of stuff. To your ability to perform the task asked of you, okay, and how well you perform, and to your character, okay, as hard as that is to define, but your character in the workplace, not your character in general, okay. When we're talking about the job search itself, you don't really need credibility or character references. Okay, you have your character references or your professional references, but you don't need like, your uncle to act as your referee. Why? Because he's a little bit too close to you, and so what he has to say, a lot of employers will take with a grain of salt. Okay, so instead of bogging down your reference list with character referees, you want to include a fair number of professional referees, people that can speak to your ability to work, your ability to do the job asked of you. And if they can speak to the specific position you're applying for, like they taught you in a related course, or you've worked in that similar field and they're your former employer, that sort of thing, then definitely send them a letter to see what they have to say. Okay. All right. So how do you ask? It's simple. You want to keep it polite. You want to keep it formal. Just the other day, I sent a message off to someone where I sent a very formal message because I knew that this was going to go on file. And then I sent a follow-up email saying like that was a little bit more casual because I wanted to ask a couple more questions. But that's the type of thing you want to think about. This is something that they're going to keep on file and reference when they're looking to write or to give your reference, if it's orally, like over the phone, or if they're asked to put together a quick letter. So you want to have this formal request sitting there in their saved file in their email server, or filed away if you send them an actual letter. So you want to ask politely. You want to be formal about it, all right? You want to inform, and I keep saying this, be formal, but you can be a little bit more casual than you would be with the cover letter because you know this person. It's just you don't want to be like, hey, what's up? You want to be like, hey, I'm writing blah, 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 blah. Okay. You want to inform or update the person about your academic studies, your work experience, and your career plans, especially if they're an older reference. So if they're an employer from a couple of years ago, what have you been doing since? What are you looking to do next? Okay, let them know. Why? Because you want them to be able to speak to your ability to do the job that you're applying for. And one way that you can help them do that is to talk about what you've done to prepare for that job. Okay, whether that's work, academic, or service, or whatever. Okay. Explain why you believe this reader can recommend you. Why are they a good reference for this position? Okay. Now you don't have to change your reference list every time you apply for a new job, but you might want to ask like 6 or 7 people. That way you can move things around depending on the job and include new references that you might not job A might benefit from 2 former professors, and job B might be all former work experience for former employers. Okay. So explain why you believe this reader can recommend you. That'll help you talk about what kind of shared experience you've had, what the position is that you're applying for, okay, or what the, if it's not a specific position, what kind of jobs are you looking at, okay? And then you want to ask specifically, ask the reader to consider your request for a reference. Ask them. You might imply it, but you don't want to imply it. You want to explicitly ask, okay? And then respectfully provide a specific response date. When do you need this a response by? And that response is just, you know, all you're doing is asking, will you serve as my reference? You're not asking for anything more. So you don't feel weird about asking them to do something, because you're just really asking for them to respond and say yes or no, okay? And then include any documents the reader might need to recommend you. So, for instance, if I'm applying for an accountant's job and I'm talking to my former employer, then I'm going to include my resume as I have it, okay? Maybe a couple of the job listings I'm looking at, and you know, I will also include in the letter or in the email a reference to, if you want anything else, just let me know, okay? So this is basically all that goes in, and it kind of goes in this order, but you can play with it a little bit more, because this is not as strict of a genre as the cover letter. Excuse me, because the people reading it, the audience for this, are people you know. So they're going to take a little bit more time to see what you're doing and see what you are asking for. Especially if you're asking them to be a reference, I hope they know you well. Right? Once you have a yes or a no, if you have a yes, then you want to immediately get their full contact information. Okay? Make sure you have it correctly and complete, because you want to include all that information on the reference list that we'll get to in a little bit. Okay? And then, like I said, make sure you prepare to stay in touch with this reference, which is, again, why you do not want graduate students as your referees. And also, honestly, if you know that an employer, a former employer, is kind of flaky, then, you know, especially in my distance past, I worked at a pizza chain in Louisville called Tony Boombas, and one of my managers one year, or for a couple of years, was a guy that notoriously got on the nerves of the owners, and so he would be fired on a regular basis. Well, I don't want to use him as my reference because he's a little bit abrasive, and because I had no idea at any point if he's going to still be at that position that I know that he's at that point, or when I asked. All right. So it's just things to keep in mind. So you can see here, and I'm not going to go into this too much, but you can see here how this is done, okay? This is a little bit more formal than I might do, because, you know, I might not be saying this correctly, but I think it's got a colon. You know, you can use a comma. It's someone you know. Remember I talked about that. A colon is sort of someone you have no idea who they are. Semicolon is if you are in a professional relationship with them, and a comma is if you are friendly with the person. Stupid grammatical rules, punctuation rules rather. All right, so here's another one, and you can see, you can look into this if you choose a little bit more. I'll put the PowerPoint up on Canvas, but you can see it's got all the basic information, except there's missing is the rationale for asking Dr. Lunsford for a reference. There's no reason why Dr. Lunsford should serve as the referee, why she should be the one that's providing a reference. Okay. All right. So you've got your reference letters out. You're waiting for a response, and then once you get the response, you want to put them together in a reference list, which is, as I've subtitled it, proof of an employer for an employer that you have people to vouch for you, people that are going to say that you are worthwhile as an employee. All right. What to include? Only references that have agreed. Again, you do not want someone to be called up out of the blue from a prospective employer and asked to say something about you without having any chance to prepare. All right. Not only is that going to make you look bad, it's going to make the person look bad because they're not prepared to speak on this person that they remember vaguely from a couple years ago and worked for them. And so they're not going to be able to speak of you in glowing terms if they are put on the spot. So you want to give them a heads up. And that's what the reference request letter is for, So give them a heads up and see if they're willing to do this. And if they are not, they will let you know, hopefully. I mean, I can't see a reason why someone would lie to you unless you had a really bad time with them, in which case don't ask them for a reference, okay? But if someone can't provide a reference for you or doesn't feel like they know you as an employee well enough anymore or whatever else, they will usually tell you, okay? And just real quick, because I forgot to mention this, I said here, inform or update about your academic studies, work experience, and career plans. This isn't working under the assumption that you are well remembered by the person, but sometimes you might look for a reference from someone that you haven't talked to in a little while. That's okay. It's fine. If you're doing that, then make sure and also include in here not just an update, but a reminder of who you are, okay? If you need a reference in a specific field, you might call on someone that doesn't know you super well or doesn't remember you. If that's the case, you might want to shy away from them, but if you do, if you're not going to, let them know who you are. Okay. Anyway, so the reference list, you want to include the full name, the job title, where they're working, okay, the company of the institution, the address, and this is a professional address, a business address. So if you have their home address, then you can use that, but you want to keep it as far as a business address. Same with phone number. You know, cell phones are fine, but if you have a work phone number and a home phone number, go for the work phone number. And this is stuff that you, again, when you get that yes, I will be your referee or a reference for you, then you want to make sure that you have all this. Checking on the email address. Maybe you had them as a professor and you use the UKY email address, but they really don't check that often, or they would prefer that for professional references that you use a different address. Just make sure, just check. Okay, they've already agreed to be a reference for you, so asking for this information is not out of line. Okay, you also want to use active verbs in a one-sentence description defining your association with that person. Again, the active verbs is a way to really assert that this is an accomplishment, or to, like with the resume, to put in the reader's mind exactly what you're trying to say instead of making it wishy-washy with the passive. Okay. Just a real quick note for this assignment, I'm going to ask that you have 4 references, but you can have anywhere from 3 to 5. If you only have 2 references, it's a little bit weird, and if you have 6, then it looks like you're overcompensating. So usually 4 is about the ideal, okay, for a reference list. And when you're doing this, remember that this reference list is not included on the resume. Remember, we talked about this, I think, during the resume PowerPoint. You don't want to put references available upon request, which used to be the standard. In fact, if you ask your parents what they did on their resume, then they probably said at the bottom of the resume, references available upon request. I know I did with my first resume. That's not the way we do it anymore. That's not what they look for in professional fields. It's a way to waste space on your resume when you only have 1 page, maybe 2. So the point is that nobody's asking for references until the interview. What used to be the case is that they would call references for the finalists and then interview only the finalists. Now, typically, jobs will do 2 rounds of interviews. In that first interview, they determine a list of 5 people, maybe less, that they're interested in hiring, and then they call the references. So the idea here is that your reference list is brought to the interview and provided to the interviewer or the community interviewing you or whatever. So you don't need to worry about it until then, ideally. So you got a little bit more time. But you want to get your ducks in a row and then have this prepared just in case. Just in case they send back and they say, well, do you have a reference list? If they shoot you an email asking for that, well, then you can give it to them right away. Okay. So here's an example. You can see here we have the name, including title. We have the So when I say title, I mean both Mr. and Mrs. Doctor and the title at the job title, okay? The address of the organization and email address. All of this is great. And then here we have, and all here, we have one word, maybe, or one sentence, maybe two sentence explanations of the connection and why this person is a referee or is a referee for you, okay? Okay, so you get the interview. You go, you shine, okay? We're not going to talk a ton about interviews in this class because that's something that's hard to do online, but I'm happy to talk to you about it in more detail if you want to. And I'm going to share an interview, a bad interview, a comedic take on an interview on Canvas that I hope you'll take a look at as what not to do. But after you've done your interview, you've talked about the job, you're ready, you've done your research into the position, you nailed it, you did a great job, you want to afterwards send a thank you letter. And this is a small nicety, but it's a way to show your interest, it's a way to show your professionalism, and it's a way to keep your name at the top of the list, or at least towards the top of the list for the employer. And you'll remember from your book, they mentioned in a couple of interviews with hiring managers that when this is something that's often skipped, and it's a big misstep to skip it, because to do it is to ensure that you're at least a name on the tip of their tongues, if not at the top of their list, because the hiring manager is going through this stuff quickly. You want to make sure that you are thought about as they're going through this material. Excuse me again. So the thank you letter, what to include. You thank the prospective employer for the interview. You refer to a specific interview date and exact job title for which you were interviewed. All right, it's not a bad idea to put the job title in the cover letter either, but here, this is a way, the specific interview, to jog the memory of the interviewer to which you are writing. Now, you'll notice down here, make sure to send off a thank you letter at least 24 hours after the interview. That's fine, but you still want to include the date so that when they're going back through their files, they can pull this out and say, oh yeah, I did interview on this date, not on Monday, last Monday or whatever. All right. You want to reaffirm your interest in the position and the larger organization. So why do you think reaffirm that you're a good fit for the job and for the company? Okay, especially including information that you gathered from the interview, not just information you gathered before the interview when you're doing your background research into the organization. You want to remind the reader of the interview by mentioning points that sparked your interest or helped form connection with the interviewer organization. So common interest, that sort of stuff. Bring this stuff up. It might sound stupid, but this is a way to forge a connection that will, again, keep your name in the hiring manager's mind. Okay? It's funny that I had blanked on that. So this is something that you want to do. And it sounds stupid, but the goal of the interview thank you letter is to thank them for interviewing you. But the real goal is to keep your name at the top of the list, or keep your name in contention for the job. And without the interview thank you letter, then you're relying on the great interview to keep your name at the top. Well, that's great and all, but if you are relying on an interview and someone else has written a letter afterwards, then they're probably going to be remembered more often or more fondly. Okay? And so this sort of information helps connect with the interviewer again, and helps keep a positive perspective of you in the interviewer or the potential employer's mind. Okay, and then you repeat the thank you, this time offering to provide further materials and to meet again. This is the action statement that ends the cover letter. Okay, and then close with a positive statement about further communication. Right? It's pretty straightforward, but you want to make sure you're doing this. So here's an example. It has a detailed reminder of the interview. Okay, February 4th. Okay, reaffirms interest in the position and his professional and polite conclusion. We even have, and this is a nice touch if you want to do this, you need to scan, or you need to work on this. I can help you out if you're interested. To include a digital signature or a signature picture as well as your name at the bottom printed. Okay, so there's a lot of here that's well done, but it's not perfect. So this interview thank you letter, the interviewer is not thanked by name. Okay, this is the human resources team. This is very generic. Okay, who's hiring? Who's in charge of the team? Okay, details from the interview simply rehash other job documents, like I said in the cover letter, like I said in the resume. What happened in the interview? Referring to the other job documents is great, but the interview thank you letter is to remind them of what happened in the interview. Okay, because all those other documents already got you the interview. Now you want to remind them of why the interview went well. Okay, and then this is just a mistake with copy editing. I don't think the resume is included. Otherwise, it would be referenced here. There's no resume included, and why would the job advertisement be sent as an interview thank you letter? Okay, so the enclosures are not updated. All right. Now, I'm not asking you to actually go do an interview or anything like that. In a previous class, I think I asked students to do a mock interview write-up, like write the questions and then write their responses. We're not going to do that for this class, but I want you to assume that you did go on an interview and when you write this. So think about this as a hypothetical interview, what would have happened, and then craft this letter. It might seem like a pointless exercise, but it is, I promise you, going to help create a template that you can reference when you're writing thank you letters in the future. I know that I have not like copied and pasted from my former cover letters or my former thank you letters, but I have gone to those, seen how I did these moves in the past, and then use that to help write a whole brand new interview thank you letter. Okay, so it's a good idea to do. All right. The last thing I'll say about this is that when you're putting this together, you want to make sure that there's a design, and we talked about the use of white space and the use of fonts and that sort of thing, but you want to make sure that your design is mirrored throughout your documents. Okay, so if you use a header, if you create a header that has all your personal information in it, make sure you use that consistently across all of your documents, especially the cover letter, the resume, and the reference list, because these three documents are what's going to be stapled together and used as the packet for why you are a good employee. The thank you letter will help and will probably be included in that, but these three documents are the vital documents that they're looking for when they consider you as an employee. So if you use a header, make sure you keep with that header. If you're using this one font on the cover letter, make sure that font is echoed here and here. Okay, you might have different heading fonts or whatever, but make sure that you are keeping some design elements throughout all of these. Okay. All right, and then finally, and this is just in case you are interested, here are some links to some other templates for either resumes or cover letters if you're still iffy about that. Purdue Owl is here, but there are some more as well. So take a look at these, and I hope this has helped. I know I went on longer than I thought I would, and I apologize, but have a good day, and let me know if you have any questions.